let's just go through a roll call. If everybody's here, just start at the top of the screen, I guess. Chris,
Chris Peich here.
Susan Franklin here.
President Katie Dugan. Sorry, I'm in a different order.
Yeah, right. We're in a different order.
All right.
All right, Corey Evans here.
Francine Lyons here.
Ralph Dormis are here.
All right, so I guess we'll start with the liaison updates. Just I have a little bit on police as well, but we can start with schools.
Yeah, so we've Katie and I have sat down so far twice with the superintendent and the chair of the school committee, and I think so far the conversations have gone excellent, both in information sharing in both directions, expectations, but also going back and forth on some challenges. Katie, I think same sensation.
Yeah, same sensation. I would say that Sarah Shannon, who is the new superintendent, is I think eager to build out a 10-year plan. What Michael McMillan had put in place, 5 years ago or so, has sort of unfortunately been lost. So, she's starting from scratch a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot of history, and so she is able to build off of that. But the details of what Michael McMillan had built out, I believe, was largely, unfortunately, not passed on to Sue Owens, who is the business manager. That being said, she's very willing to sort of work with us on that as a project. We talked about specifically that, it may be a work in progress this year that she keeps on building on as the years progress. And certainly her goal is to have a packet which includes at least a draft of that. It may not be as complete as we want it in the out years, but in sort of the year 1, 2, 3, sort of the near term, medium term, she's going to try and build out quite a bit of detail. So I think that was good news. And, she's very open to providing additional context and information. I think she's sort of taken the bull by the horns of trying to make sure that not only are we getting the funding request forms, but we're getting enough detail so that when members are reviewing it, you don't have a 2-page list of questions. And so hopefully people will come into the initial presentation with most of the information they're looking for. Obviously know that there'll be follow-up. We're meeting with them in early January to review perhaps a first pass of more detail, but right now it's been sort of just partnership building more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think the we have number A, because I think one of the topics that this committee's gone through in circles a few times, and Katie has previously on school committee, when she was on school committee, was the capital budget contribution to the school bus leases. And there are kind of two big updates there. One, the quote unquote Bluebird backup bus is apparently just no longer functioning at all. So there's an expectation that there will be an additional bus coming to capital budget for requests for leasing, in addition to the 8 that we currently lease. But the schools have also asked us to at least begin the conversation about looking at how much we fund for each lease, what percentage we fund versus the schools fund. And Katie was amazing enough to recall and bring up a bunch of paperwork that was done previously. And we're trying to reset that conversation with the expectation that it appears that capital budget right now is underfunding kind of what we were designed to fund in the beginning. So that's something that's on the radar. We also went through, and Michelle, you had already done this work, so thank you. All the funds that we can incorporate back into the capital stabilization fund. Everyone was on the same page about a lot of those, but we did go through line by line and kind of get a final okay from the superintendent's office. And then the number B is long day, is the IT request. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to jump into that. Schools also has part of the IT request, but we'll do that later. My apologies.
Yeah, and I would say on the only thing that we heard, that I don't think the full committee has heard is that when we had talked about previous appropriations, there was the $479,000 appropriation done in 2022 for the middle high school HVAC, and a similar one, not at the same size, it was like 70,000 to Deer Hill. And when we had talked, it sounds like it had gone out to bid 3 times, and unfortunately couldn't fit within the previous appropriation. It sounds like Nick has worked now some rescoping of it. So the project is moving forward, but the scope is changed in that they're going to complete all of the Deer Hill and only part of the Cohasset Middle High School using that full appropriation. So that rather large open appropriation is, it sounds like, likely to be underway and used in the next 12 months, which is good news. It's just, it's no longer a dangling Chad in terms of whether we can reappropriate or not. The answer is not this year for sure, until they can figure it out. But it sounds like whatever they were bidding for the middle high school was coming in much, much higher than the previous appropriations. They kind of rescoped it and focused it all on Deer Hill. So that was the other big update.
Michelle, did we ever get a final number on the amount of repurposed funds?
So I have a quick worksheet, and this is everyone that got back to me on what can be repurposed. And the number right now is at 384,412.99. And I can show you those line items if you're interested. If you want me to share my screen, I can just put it up real quick. And you can see where the money's coming from.
Please.
Yeah, that's great.
Of course, there's some people that are hesitant to turn back any money, but the discussion was, if you're not going to turn back money, and you're asking for capital funding, before you get capital funding this year, you need to have an explanation as to why you're holding on to the funds from prior years.
Well done.
So,
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say turn off their heat, but what you're doing seems a little more seems really appropriate.
Here it is. Okay. Okay. So here we have it. So as far as DPW, Brian is not comfortable with turning anything back from South Main Culvert. That is in progress currently as we speak.
You mind enlarging that just a little bit?
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
As far as the salt shed, the last final touches are going on that now. He's still confident he can give back $11,000, and he's hoping to give back more, but doesn't have that exact amount yet. Trees Pond flood relief, he said that's an ongoing project. However, that's going to have to be built into the budget because that is going to be maintenance over a period of time. So that shouldn't come out of capital. As far as the fuel depot, that has been completed. So that additional $2,400 can be turned back. The air handlers, as you just said, Katie, they're going to hold on to that $39,000 for Deer Hill, because they did rescope the project and they are going to go back out for that. That's part of the project that Nick was talking about. The Osgood sprinkler heads, he is turning back that $5,100. The project is complete and that's no longer needed. The middle school HVAC system, that $479, like you said, that is in progress. We're going to go back out to bid on that fairly soon. So we're hoping to stay within that number or even less. The science lab plumbing, that came in significantly less, so he's turning back $13,479. The HVAC at the DPW, those $200 remaining, is turning that back. The mini split for the middle school health room or the nurse's office, he's turning back $18,703. They found an easier way to get the conduit through, and a majority of that was because it was the block construction, and they feared that they would have to, you know, take that wall down, but they didn't have to. The garage door replacement at the fire department, he's turning back $5,800. The police station roof came in under budget. The same people that are doing the town hall roof actually did the police station roof, and we saved $20,000 there. HVAC upgrades, Nick wants to dig into that a little further. He's not sure if that has to do with the DPW building or not. So he's holding on to that for now until he does a little more research, but he thinks he'll be able to turn that $5,200 back. Town hall roof. So we had an appropriation of $325,000. The bid came in originally at $90,000 when they started working, as we could have all imagined. When they started working on the historic portion of the roof, they had to replace all the sheathing in the historic portion of the roof, which increased the price to a total of $118,000. But they're going to turn back the $205,000 that's no longer needed. That was the final change order.
Did
Data
that
center
get done,
upgrade.
Michelle?
Oops, sorry, what?
Did that get completed over the weekend?
It did. The roof is completed. They're going to put the gutters on tomorrow, and then the project will be 100% complete.
Great.
Great.
The data center upgrades that Ron requested, his team was able to do a lot of the work himself. So he's of the $108,000, he's turning back $70,000 of it, and he's holding on to the remainder until he makes sure that all the equipment and everything is in and paid for. Same for the network security upgrade. His team was able to do a lot of the work themselves. So he's turning back $30,000. So that was a comfortable turn back from him. He said he's going to look into it further, and in the coming weeks, he'll know if he can turn back even more. So as of right now, we have a total of $384 turning back to capital budget.
That's great.
Fantastic.
I have a question for the committee on schools. Corey alluded to it on the bus leases. When I was on school committee, we had come up with a model that we used for the bus leasing. And it was based on a total cost of ownership. And it was something that we used consistently in 15, 16, 17, and 19. And the intent at the time, Brian and I had talked about putting it in a kind of memorandum of understanding. I don't believe we did that, but the agreement is that the model sort of stood as the quote unquote understanding of how the bus leases were being funded. I've gone back and I've looked at it and I understand what we were saying. But the biggest assumption that sort of, I'm not sure stands the test of time, is we had this concept of like, here's what the bus leases cost, here's what the maintenance on leased and owned fleet cost based on actual expenses that the school district incurred to get to a total cost of ownership. And then we subtracted out what was the 2015 maintenance budget, which was the operating expenses that the school basically no longer had to cover because we went to a lease model. And so it was a plug. But flash forward a decade later, we're still using it. I understand why we did it, and it absolutely makes sense. But like flash forward another 10 years from now, you're going to be talking to a superintendent and saying, well, we've got this model, we go to total cost of ownership and we subtract out a 2015 maintenance number that helped your budget. It just feels weird. And at the time, I know the conversation was, we don't want to basically give the school's operating budget upside by funding, or basically like not making them continue to have quote unquote skin in the game. But it's just a weird model, and it's going to get weirder as time goes by. So I throw it out there to the committee as to whether there's a more elegant way of doing this. And I think that's what we sort of need to discuss, whether we just accept the bus leases as the capital cost, or do we come up with some percent that we memorialize in a memorandum of understanding between capital budget and the schools. But the way it's been done to date has sort of been this plug. And I don't know how it was calculated the last couple of years, but it doesn't feel like it's been model based, but rather just sort of, we'll give you 90,000 and you guys come up with the rest of it for the bus lease.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That number is just arbitrary now. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
Correct. That was our conclusion as well. And you know, the idea being that, and this was, I think, the members that were on this committee before, but it was pretty clear that the town does not want to be in the school bus owning business. Brian Ho said that before. I mean, we're just not set up for maintenance and hiring staff and all that. That was just the amount of money we were spending on that was just so avoiding that at all costs is kind of like is option really A. And you know, we were talking about, we explored a little bit about at what point does a bus become expensive? And it's really, it seems like, Katie, based on your memory, it was about year 5 where kind of the maintenance costs got kind of so insane that they were no longer able to really be absorbed by a normal budgetary process. So if we're leasing buses and we're talking about the 5-year plan, like a 5-year kind of cycle, then maintenance would be pretty low on buses that are that new. But considering that we don't want to be in the owning business where we, you know, because we're just not able to effectively and efficiently execute on a maintenance plan, then it kind of makes sense for capital to be contributing more to the leases because again, we're avoiding a lot of that expense that we wouldn't be able to handle anyway. So I do think the calculation has changed, and I've been, you know, resistant to that for a long time, but you know, looking at especially what's coming up, because we're going to have to renegotiate the leases coming up fairly soon. We have this one new bus. It kind of gives us the perfect time to, you know, reset and set a number, as Katie said. That's just a percentage that we just move on. We just use moving forward, and try to save a lot of time and energy in figuring this out every year.
Yeah. So really where leases get expensive is when you extend them. And I know that we did that a lot with these buses over time. So I need a little bit of a refresher, Katie, and
Yeah.
Corey, if you guys are just recently looking at it, was the last round all buses on the same term to start again?
It
or
was,
staggering?
exactly. And it was, I have a copy of that lease agreement, but I've got some questions on it that I still haven't had answered. So we have a lease agreement that covered us for 2020 through 2022. And then I see a quote for one that runs from 2023 to 2026. So I believe that we are coming up on the final year of a lease for 8 buses.
And what was the term of that lease to start?
I believe it was 4 years. So I think it was, when we started this program, we were on a 3-year lease.
Yeah.
I think we did a 3-year lease, and then we did another 3-year lease. And the most recent one we did, which was covering fiscal 23 through fiscal 26, was a 4-year lease.
And was that due to the fact that we were tending to extend the leases and we just thought we would go longer from the get-go and lower the payments, or?
I don't know the history behind that, and I'm not sure.
I think we just,
I haven't asked the question, Susan.
Yeah.
My understanding was that we were doing 3 years.
Yeah. I do
we tacked a
remember
year
we
on
spent-
because it was during COVID though. Was it 1 or 2 years, Michelle? I remember but I think it was last cycle, not this cycle, that we tacked them on, didn't we?
I'm pulling up the last email from Susan that has all the bus leases because I feel like we just renegotiated the bus lease last year.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was a renewal. That's.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just check. Let me pull
So
it up.
maybe I have paperwork that's not tying
Yeah, I think this lease term that I sent you, Katie, expires next fiscal year, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fiscal 26.
Yeah.
Well,
But I guess your point,
actually supposed to-
Susan, is that you would rather have a fresh lease with new buses than
well, I
extend.
think what I'm saying is I think we need to analyze a little bit rather than just like sign up again for another 8 buses on the same exact sort of schedule. You know, you do this a lot on IT leases where you have a portion of them expire.
Yeah.
You roll them basically. So you're never in a situation where everything ends all on the same day and you have to give back all your equipment. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But also in this circumstance, if we are finding that we're going to keep some of them longer than others, from a cost perspective, you pay a lot more by extending at the end than if you just did it for a longer term at the beginning. So it might
Yeah.
be worth saying do three buses at this and 3 buses at that, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Just-
yeah, I think the plan's always been to turn them over on time as a
Yeah.
batch. So one of the conversations is if we're adding one bus now, we ask them to give us like a 1 year option. That way we can turn all 9 of them over on the same cycle and kind of return to normalcy. So I get what you're saying. I think that's
Yeah.
we brought that to them as well, rather than having 1 and then 3 and then extending the 1. Just see if we can do 1 for 1 year, and then we can reset the whole batch on the same schedule and
Okay.
get away from whatever this weirdness is.
Okay,
So I did just pull up the note and Katie, you are correct. So we renegotiated in 23 and it ends in 26. And it's for $151,330
Yeah.
annually
So it's $18,916
per
per bus.
bus for 8 buses.
Which is kind of interesting to me, only because I went back and I looked at what our first lease was. Our first lease was $18,148 per bus.
Yeah, since we
So-
got a better deal, right?
Well, I'm just saying that part of me was sort of surprised, given the cost of inflation, that the cost per bus in terms of a bus lease hasn't gone up. It's stayed roughly $18,000 per bus annually as a lease number between 2015 and our most recent lease agreement, which was post-COVID. Maybe I'm thinking about that wrong, Susan, but I was just sort of surprised that
well,
this.
yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out. So when you're talking about the extension there, that you just mentioned, Michelle. That's an extension. It's not like a new writing of new leases with new buses. We're extending existing buses.
That was new. That
Oh,
was new.
new.
Yeah,
was
we
new.
extended, I think, the one that ended in 22 to 23 or something
Okay,
like
all right.
yeah.
Right.
Because it was literally the bus leases extended, it ended right in the smack dab middle of COVID. I was in the select board at that time. And it was
Okay.
like, rather than try to figure this out again, we're just going to tack on another year. And the bus company was happy to do it because they didn't know what to do with them either. So
Okay. Great. Then it sounds like it's in pretty good shape, but thinking about it, go forward, we still want to think about.
except for the one bus. Yeah, the one bus we want to,
Yeah.
and again, Michelle, is it better? Is there any negotiation benefit by doing just 1 or 9, or is it basically each bus is a la carte, each bus?
So I think what we've done with other contracts in the past is if you add a bus, you have it all coterminous. So everything ends
Oh,
at the same time. So then you
right.
can restart everything at the same time.
Yeah.
There's a benefit to us and there's a benefit to the company for doing that.
Okay.
So that's what we would advise with the schools. I did just forward the email Sue gave me last year that has a breakdown of the past 3 bus leases. So everyone has it in their email.
That's helpful.
So one more thing in that
yeah.
last conversation is, for those of you who have been on the committee prior years, we've often had requests for other modes of transportation for the school,
Mhm.
like minivans or vans to.
That's
take-
still
or-
in the ether. Yep.
It's still out there. That's a different conversation to me. Like, there's like the core routes that need to be covered, and like we can't mess around with that. And then there's the athletics
Right,
and the positioning around the athletics van, at least initially, was around equity. In that some sports parents are forced, or not forced, but in some sports parents are asked to do transportation, where in other sports they're not. And so it was more of an equity conversation relative to the requests that we're likely to see around a 15-passenger minibus versus the one bus that they're looking to request a lease on for this year is truly a replacement of what is needed to cover the routes.
I
so-
just bring it up because I remember last year, the discussion did go to, well, are we leasing enough buses to, if the vans aren't going to work out, because there were issues around the vans. Some people felt like there were liability issues and who's really going to drive them.
Mhm.
And so I'm just bringing it up as,
Yeah,
It's
should
still
the
out.
number of lease buses be changed?
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the van thing is also, because when you're doing a bus, you're also getting a driver, and there are teams that don't need a full bus. There's a lot of things. So we I don't want to say we put that off to the side, but that's still a deep dive that the schools feel is necessary, and I don't think Katie or I or the committee really has a full handle on. But I still think, at the end of last cycle, one thing that I was looking for is some way to pilot this rather than, buying 2 vans and having them sit in a parking lot and figure out what we're doing. Like, is there some way that we can pilot? I think we talked about rentals. We talked about maybe like a 1-year lease, but some way to pilot to really figure out if this is a solution or not, because I still think there's questions there. But I think the best way at this point to do it may just be to, see what happens. So, but we'll bring that back up.
I think past conversations, Corey, and I may be incorrect, but they have that 6D vehicle that they only use during the daytime. And if they wanted to pilot something, they were going to maybe test that out for some athletic trips.
I wasn't part of those conversations, so I'm not sure.
No?
Okay. That doesn't strike a chord. Sorry.
Okay.
What bus, what vehicle is
They-
that?
They have a 6D vehicle bus to transport handicapped
Oh,
students.
yeah, okay.
And while that's not being used after school typically, we had talked maybe about them using that. I don't know if it actually even came to this committee, maybe just ended at the schools, but
Yeah. And it's good for us to know, because I'm not sure whether Sarah Shannon wouldn't necessarily known about that conversation. She obviously knows about the vehicle, but.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's helpful.
and then the electric bus,
Yeah, so the
It-
electric bus.
yeah, so we had an initial call. And Corey, you can talk about that. And then we had a follow-up call last week, which was interesting to hear that the bus really isn't working. It's been out of service, and not due to the charging stations, just due to maintenance issues, because it's not holding a charge. So we did have a conversation with NL directly and asked them what the likelihood was that they wanted to maintain this relationship in this pilot program. And what came out of that was they were going to get through last Friday. They had a mechanic on site to see if they could fix the bus. And then we would regroup next week, or the week after Christmas, to figure out if there's a plan to get this bus in working order, and if this pilot is going to move forward, or if the town just wants to, call it quits and let's put that $25,000 a year towards leasing another bus, or, figure something out, because it's our budget season now, and they are aware that we're under a time constraint to figure this out.
And yeah, we talked heavily about just making sure that the town is protected from, and what different options we have for, and what we expressed that the timeline is short because every day that the bus can't operate, we've got kids that need to get to school, and we don't have the luxury of waiting around to figure it out. So we appreciate that it was a pilot, but at the same time, there are certain levels of deliverables that we have to make a call on. So that's because that, basically the schools are down, 2 buses, both with the backup bus and the electric bus not being, they're trying to do all the routes with 7 or 8 instead of the 10. So I think getting them to 9 working buses is kind of the healthy point. I think that like 10, but at this point, if they just had 9 that worked, I think that's kind of where they can execute on what they need to do, and we don't have extra buses sitting around. So,
I mean, because not having a backup bus is not, you've got your routes that have to operate every day, and then not having a backup bus if a route bus is under maintenance or has an issue is a significant problem. And then on top of that, you do need that extra bus often for
go out of town. Yeah, exactly.
or out of town. So I think Corey's right. Like, the steady state is 9 functioning, and right now we have 8 only, because we have a
Right.
broken Bluebird that's not running, and we have an electric bus that won't charge. So we're short something right now. So, in general, I think the number we're going to see from the schools is big. I did a little summary in my Excel spreadsheet. It was $1.1 million. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. I think the good part of like having these liaison meetings is that, Craig and Sarah didn't really have a sense as like what the budget would look like for us. And so Craig's like, well, you appropriated $3 million last year. I'm like, well, Craig, well, hold on. Like, yes, there was $3 million in the warrant, but you subtract out what was school stabilization and road stabilization, you really whittle it down, it
Free
was
cash,
2
yeah.
million cash. And so we walked him through the budget and we're like, we probably have, somewhere, around 1.8 million, maybe a little bit north, but we don't have, $3 million. So I think it was a good level setting conversation. And I think the one question that Sarah asked us was like, when do you want us to start to prioritize? And I'm like, well, like prioritizing, like flush out what you need, but certainly 1.1 is not gonna fit into our cash appropriation budget. So I think they've heard that message, which was helpful early in the cycle. But they're still gonna work through their process, and then they know that prioritizations are coming, I think was the happy sort of update on that.
Yeah, can I just add something to that? So I received the school's capital plan, obviously rough draft because they're working with their liaisons. And they have their school capital plan, which is shaking out at probably about $1.3 million based on Sue's list. But then they also have all of those facilities requests, and that is another $1.6 million. So I understand that the schools, are prioritizing based on, building needs goes under facilities. More everyday school ops goes under their capital plan. But when we talk about it, they're actually asking for almost $3 million.
Yeah. I mean, well, and we had a very candid conversation that the school stabilization fund is only going to cover at this point Osgood for the next cycle. So I guess I'm not surprised that there's more coming in, but they also know that the total budget doesn't fit all of that.
And I'm happy
Yeah, it
to
was,
give you a quick snapshot if you want to see what
Yeah, I'd be
everyone
curious to
submitted.
see.
I'm sorry, Corey, I cut you off.
no, go ahead, no.
Okay. So when we look at this capital plan, so here's your facilities request. Everything highlighted here would be schools under facilities. And then, of course, you have your school requests, which are all here under schools.
And just give me an example of the facilities ones, because the only one that I had seen, well, I had seen two. I had seen the starter for the elevator, and then I had seen a bunch of asphalt and road ones, which I knew they wanted, but had sort of said that like, there's no way that's going to get all done in one lump.
Yeah. Yes. So, something they're asking for is the Deer Hill concrete handicap ramps and railings. I mean, important safety feature, right? I would think. The funding for the roof. Osgood carpeting is one of them. And then that elevator mechanism that you're speaking of.
Yeah.
Is what they're asking for from the facilities team for this year. And then,
But I'm sorry, that 1.5 million, like 1.5 of that is the Osgood roof, right?
yes. Yep.
Of the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of the 1 point whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, so there's two questions. I don't want to necessarily dive too much into it just because it's probably a lot of it's up in the air, but I, obviously get Nick's opinion on kind of what need to be done now versus what they can get through. And then we have to figure out which bucket stuff goes into, right? That's,
Right.
for a lot of this stuff. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
And while we're looking at just this quick snapshot is so select board would like to look at this in detail on their January 7th meeting, I believe, with capital present. So if you're open to a joint meeting, I think we can look at it together, and then they're going to prioritize or help prioritize some of the items that they want to see move forward.
Great.
Is that typical?
Yeah, it's something that they have done for the past couple of years.
I guess what I'm a little bit, and I'll just say it, I'm a little reticent in that this is the wish list. And we're sort of having discussion about the total wish list before any of the culling of it
Hmm.
has been done to narrow it down to like, here's where the true puzzle isn't fitting together. I guess that's my concern, is that like, if there isn't that culling, there's a risk that one of the wish list items like strikes a chord with somebody as a project that has to get done before there's been any vetting of how it all fits together.
Yep, and I can appreciate that. I think what we've seen in the past is that everyone, not everyone, most departments wait until, the very last minute. So we're up against a time crunch and we're always racing towards a town meeting, right? We'd race towards special and then we'd race towards annual because we had a deadline on this of the end of October. We're still getting stuff in. So I think the idea is, let's put it in front of select board and say, here's your first pass at it, with the understanding, just like you said, Katie, that, everything hasn't been vetted, just so they can see what this capital plan is, what the formation of it is. I don't believe they're going to start prioritizing on January 7th. I think they just want an idea or a snapshot as to, what the asks are, and how much funding people are asking for in the major projects. But as far as
Let's-
some of the smaller
Because
items,
in some ways, I thought that was capital's job, was to go through and help like figure out what the prioritization would be.
I think you're right, Katie. That's exactly what we're there for.
Yeah, it seems a little premature, Michelle. I mean, if you want us to reach out to Ellen or whatever it is, I mean, push us off, give us at least another couple of weeks to kind of get through these, because I get the sensation it's going to be 60 minutes of posturing and statements that don't really have any basis in anything.
I mean,
And by the way, like, we haven't even, I mean, you put it up on the screen, we haven't.
We
even-
can't do anything about it either.
I
Right.
feel like-
right. So the process has been that Chris does go through, the town manager does go through he does vet them all ahead of time. So he does his own, and he makes a recommendation as to what should move forward. And that's typically what comes to this board.
Yeah.
So I think that is more of the process, that what finally gets to this board. As far as the other department heads submitting requests, as you said, there's only so much money in this, we can't give everything to everybody. So I think there's a lot of vetting. I think you vet as liaisons. I think Chris, as the town manager, also vets it, as well as the select board. So I think there's a lot of vetting going on.
Yeah, the way to look at that, the whole thing though, is this board should be prioritizing together with the departments, not solely, but with them. That's the way we've always done in the past. And then when we get to the point where we've individually done each department, we try to prioritize the list in its entirety. There was a process in doing that allowed, sort of kind of projects sort of off the beaten path from being brought up to the front all the time. So it was a process by which we in fact did our jobs and then figured out for the town, based on a $1.5 million, $1.8 million, whatever the number was, figured out what really fit. So, but to preempt that in any way is very dangerous, I think. And then you end up having to reduce things rather than to say, okay, what's the right priority? So we ought to keep our independence in this one. So
Give them their time back.
Well, it doesn't sound like we have that option. It's moving forward on the 7th, if I hear you correctly, Michelle.
No, it's fine. I can reach
No,
out.
no,
to
we can
Ellen.
we can
No,
work
we
that
can
out.
reach
Yeah.
out to Ellen. She had
Yeah.
just said,
I
the
think she's
sooner the better, because we don't want to be racing to another town meeting. In no way is she saying it has to be on the 7th.
Okay.
And that's it. So
Ellen's trying to do things the right way, and we're just saying, hey, yes,
We
we're on
just
the
need a
same
little
page,
more time,
but not
that's
yet.
all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess
It's the
that would,
prioritization piece that is a problem here. If we were just trying to, open up the conversation to a wider audience, because it's a lot to talk about in multiple meetings, then we've done that in the past. But Ralph is right. We do
Yeah.
go through that process individually with the department and get them to help prioritize their list compared to the priorities of all the other lists, and figure out how we're going to make the most effective use of the money for the need.
I mean, and I can't say that I'm up to speed with the select board goals, but if there was some sort of request in here that was in line with select board goals, like I think one of the big discussions we haven't gotten to yet, though, is the cameras and IT. if one of the select board goals was to execute that this year, that would be something that then we'd have to, you know, add into our things. But I don't think there's any of that. So absent that, I can't, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Because that'd be a little different if they pluck something out and said this is what we're doing, then I think there'd be a place for that conversation. But yeah, for now we're premature. Okay.
All right, so I will talk to Ellen. And I'll make sure you all have the 10-year capital plan or what I have, the semblance I have of it. And then, you know, I will just let her know that you're still doing your vetting process with the individual department heads. And as soon as we have more information, we will share it.
Right, do we want to move on to IT or?
Yeah, so Ralph and I are trying to work with Ron to schedule a timing. But I mean, here's the thing about here's the IT ask is enormous already. And I don't know, what was the total, Michelle, like $400,000, something like that. So yeah, with all the cameras and stuff, everything together. Yeah. So the question I have for the committee, and this is, I think I talked about a few weeks ago, is like, who's the conductor? Because we have every department is, if you look at our folders, not every department, most buildings have a request for cameras. And these
Mhm.
cameras are part of, they're going to plug into IT because because the cameras are going to plug into the new switches, which is coming from Ron. But what we have is this little bit of a disjointed of, okay, we can bring in, let's say, somebody from, you know, the director of the library to say, okay, you're asking for $25,000 of cameras. I'm just picking this up. And that person's not going to necessarily have the technical expertise to answer why or where they go to. But they're also not necessarily Ron's request because it's the departments that are requesting them. So the question I have for the committee is, how do we want to schedule that? Who do we want to hear from on this? Because we can, you know, I don't want to necessarily have ask Ron to answer for every department, but he's going to be the technical expert. So I want us to be clear about who we want to see on these things, because I don't want to be asking the wrong questions to the wrong people.
Well, here's my take, which is, and I'll just use Elder Affairs as like a simple example. Like Elder Affairs is asking for 3 cameras, and it's basically, we need to cover these lines of sight. And they have a rationale for those lines of sight as to why they're important in terms of property protection, safety of their members. So they understand why they need 3. And the placement of them. So that's the value that they bring to the conversation. But the whole IT installation, all of that, plugging it into the bigger network, there's not any information you're going to get from Elder Affairs about
Types of
that.
cameras, costs, those side of things.
Right. I mean, she has a quote from that Ron gave her for the 3 cameras.
Right.
So to me, it's like the IT conversation about the backbone that this is getting plugged into, and the cost of that is like the critical conversation around whether we want that and whether we can afford that this year.
Mhm.
The camera piece really comes down to how many you need, what do you need to cover. The schools are a little bit more complicated just because I think it's like a count of 52.
Right.
There's maybe higher stakes in terms of some of the coverage on them, but that's the camera piece is the easy conversation to me, because you either need to see it or you don't need to see it. And there's
Right. It's very straightforward.
it's the guts that I don't understand. That's actually, I think, in some cases, at least half the expense, if not more.
Well, and the other question is, and Michelle, I wanted to kind of punt this up to the select board level, is this, because it's such a town-wide thing, is this something that we should have like a 2 or 3 year action plan on? Like the select board says, you know, Chris, you know, town manager's office, we want you to, you know, bring a 3-year plan to have the entire, you know, security apparatus in town upgraded. And then we can execute 1, 2, 3, because it does feel like this is a lot to digest in year 1. And one of my questions for Ron is, how much can we actually do within 1 year? I mean, there's a lot of work here. So that was kind of be, we haven't met with Ron yet, but that's my initial question, is how much can we actually do in 1 fiscal year?
Because I think when you add up all the total requests that we have thus far, we're looking at about almost $500,000 of
Correct.
cameraing for
Right.
town
Yeah.
buildings. included.
Yeah, well, and there's backbone stuff too, right? So it's like, are you going to be able to get the backbone in here, and then the people to run the wires, and then also procure the cameras, and then get on ladders and install the cameras like that? For the amount of buildings we have, I don't think we can do that in 12 months.
Also, I think
So-
there's a major question of priorities. The priority has always been safety of the schools. And
Yeah.
the question after that is, what is the next priority? You know,
Mhm.
is it really that we have to have cameras everywhere in this town? And in fact, how are they looked at? If you've ever looked at what you've seen in the police department, you can't even imagine having that many feeds going in. They are not meaningful. So you have to really ask, what's the value in all of that? I know
Mm.
there's a value in recording things, but it's not a value in preventing things. I would rather see it as a preventive, particularly for the schools. In other words, you really prioritizing this thing is critical. And the
Well
second
put.
thing is, one of the things that might actually make this sort of flesh out a little bit is to say, okay, if you want the cameras themselves are something coming out of your budget, the installation is coming out of the IT budget. And that will make people think about what's the priority versus other things the library might want. This has to be thought out in a very different way than just simply, we need more cameras. So
Right.
But I still think that having IT in first to explain the overall project, particularly the backbone piece of it, is the right first step, because getting the departments in, like, we're gonna start having camera requests that we don't know what to do with if we don't understand what it is
Yeah.
in terms of the broader project. So like, my goal would hopefully to have Ron in like ASAP in January.
I agree with that. I think the backbone is a critical question, but that raises huge issues about, speeds and feeds. What do we really need and what don't we have right now? So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
that's a very technical set of discussions that do need to take place.
Yeah, to all these points, which are very good.
Yeah.
I feel like we want to start with Ron because we don't want to get all of the departments' requests coming in, sort of arguing from different perspectives. I would like to learn from Ron and then figure out what that means in terms of the questions we need answered by department. If we could get it to be more standardized, we're talking about sight lines or accessibility, whether it's preventative or whether it's you look at it later, how long do you want to store your data? You know what I mean? Like, if
Yeah.
rather than just getting a mishmash and then trying to figure out which one of apples versus oranges is the more valuable proposition, would be very hard. So I think we need to educate ourselves first.
And I think
that
Ralph's,
might roll into
sorry,
your
Susan.
thing, Corey, about, it might help formalize it as a rollout of a program over
Yeah.
time.
And Ralph's point about, like, are these protection, or are they just recording for later on, is a good one. I think with the schools, it's an active thing for the schools, but for the other departments, it really is a passive, in the investigation role. And I would say asking the police chief, but the police chief's job is to just tell us that we need more safety stuff. So I'm not quite sure I want to put him on the spot for asking, like, how much is really important, but how do you, really, are we gonna, every department's gonna say it's valuable to have a camera feed of this, but the question becomes, well, why? Like, what exactly do we need the camera feed for, outside of potentially seeing something once every 4 years that I think Ralph's point is a good one, which is, how do we prioritize this? What rubric can we use? Because we're going to run into, well, this is safety. And then once someone says safety, then the conversation usually kind of ends. So we have to figure out a way to kind of have that intellectual conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think you're gonna see in the submissions just the same quote with it, 3 times whatever, 52 times whatever. You're gonna see the same quote over and over again in the back of materials, but it really belies the bigger questions that we're trying to get answered about, A, why do we want a network like this overall? And B, for each individual facility, what are the cameras capturing? Why? And so, the quotes themselves are going to start to look the same unless we have a rubric to sort of understand behind it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we'll bring this to Ron, and lay the basis for our conversation.
You would think, Michelle, we can get him in? I mean, it feels like he should be critical to serve our
course.
January agenda.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's ready. I mean,
Yeah, it's
he has all
partly-
of his materials
Yeah,
always.
Yeah.
And it's partly my problem. I didn't feel as though I wanted to put aside a lot of things this week and next week to do this, and wanted to wait till after Christmas at least. Okay, that's all.
Yeah. That's
And-
fair.
And
No
in fairness,
problem.
Ralph, he is wrapped up in the fiber project right now. He's running
Okay.
fiber to 135 King Street.
Okay,
So he's pretty wrapped up in that until the holidays.
okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're slowing down. It's just like getting him in as sort of our first
Right.
department would be really helpful.
That, as I say, is not going to be easy. We're going to ask some very tough questions, and I won't raise them all now, but I can tell you there's some really hard questions that have to be asked about this entire upgrade to this system, so.
Can I ask, just to clarify for myself, on the schools related to the cameras, I guess maybe across the board, it's all exterior cameras, right? Because I thought, okay, because I thought within the last few years or so, the schools had asked for some interior cameras for safety issues. And I don't recall exactly how many, if it was just on the middle school side or they were replacing cameras, but I do recall having that conversation. But you're saying it's not exterior cameras, it's interior.
It's
It's
exterior.
both. So my
Oh, it's
understanding it's
exterior.
both. So there's two requests from the schools. There's one that is exterior and there's
Okay.
one that is interior. So it's a large camera request for the schools.
Okay, because I do think, I don't know, folks that have been on the committee for a long time, I know we've had this conversation about schools, so with the schools in the last few years about interior cameras, maybe it was middle school in particular, but I know we have.
Oh, we definitely did. The kind of conversation was, what was the ability to see down a corridor, for example, those kinds of.
Right.
How many cameras did you need to actually see an
That's right.
entire corridor? Yeah,
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was that Deer Hill currently doesn't have cameras. So like there's
Okay.
there's one facility that is devoid.
I
Osgood has some external, but not perfect. And the middle high school has external and internal. It's a question of upgrading
I see.
what they have or changing out what they have. So
Got it. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry, guys.
okay.
The
all right.
television's on a little loud downstairs.
My favorite episode of Love Island too. So it's fine.
Okay, so I was just gonna cover the police quickly. Their request is in very good shape as usual. And we have all the parts. For the people who have been on the committee before, we requested the vehicle rollover plan, and I did receive that. And details on a couple of other programs that they're looking at. We have all the backup. The one piece of interesting news that the chief gave me about the vehicles is that the electric vehicles aren't working out at all. They're having a lot of trouble with them, a lot of maintenance issues, a lot of issues with stalling when it's raining, or and things like that. So they want to actually get away from electrical vehicles overall.
The hybrids
Yeah.
for the police.
The
Oh, that's
hybrids.
too bad. Yeah, because they were. I talked to you a few years ago. They loved them. It's too bad that it's not working out.
That is too bad.
Yeah.
But I did put the details for all that out on the
Okay.
OneDrive. If anybody wants to start taking a look at it in preparation for when the police department comes. But again, it was a very open discussion, and he covered everything. And he also told me about some interesting technologies that he has. He met a guy at a conference who's writing a program, and they're going to use our police station as kind of a test to use this program to answer questions for people when they come into the police station. They can go to a kiosk first and ask this kiosk. It's kind of like I kind of think of it like like an enclosed chat GTP environment
Yeah,
where it's just going
chatbot.
out to our own world and it's finding answers to questions like, what's the building code in, region B of the town for lot lines or whatever. They get questions about everything. Who can let me into the light keepers and just a whole litany of questions. So they're gonna build that out and test it. And he actually gave me the login and password to play with it if I wanted to see how it worked.
Great.
But anyways, the stuff's out there, so I think they're in good shape. He also shared, and I think I forwarded that all on to you guys, the information about the public safety building and where to find
Yeah.
information on what's going on there. They have a weekly update that they do as to where everything's going. So.
I
good
had one
source of
question for
information.
that on public safety building, just thank you for the reports. I haven't had a chance to go through them in as much detail as I wanted. I guess I wasn't sure, and this is just me being out of the loop over the last, 2 capital cycles. Are there more requests coming in order to make that, to fix the deficits at the new facility and the old Elm Street facility? I mean, when I looked at the report, I was like, wow, there's a lot here in terms of like upgrades. Was that budgeted into the appropriation that was previously made?
So it wasn't.
Okay.
So we took a square foot number, based on prior projects, and that's how we came up with the number. After going through all the analysis and engineering that we've gone through, to date, we will be coming back for additional requests, for both buildings. Originally 62 Elm Street, we thought that we could just have our facilities team work on that building, and just, move some walls and it would be an easy fix. Unfortunately, due to, ADA requirements and new energy code and, things that we're seeing, there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. So we are compiling all the data and we will come back to this committee with an additional ask.
Is that going to be part of this year's cycle?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it bigger than a bread box? I mean, like, are we talking? I mean, what do you? I guess we
What
have
size is this?
we have a $500,000 camera request. We've got
$1 million in schools, right?
yeah. It's feeling really.
Have we checked the phone booths for change yet? Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, Katie, if it makes you feel any better, it's like this every year. The asks always far exceed
Yeah.
what we have.
Okay.
Um,
That's fine.
but Chief did say that, the 62 Elm is a big unknown right now because it hasn't been vetted as deeply, as the public safety building. So there's a lot of moving parts there. They were gonna claw back a little bit on the on some of the things they were thinking about doing, but they haven't got far enough along to really, start putting numbers behind things.
Okay.
So we were given a date, just today, Susan, of, January 17th. We're gonna have some design development done, and that'll give us a better idea on, how much more money we're looking for and what exactly the money is gonna be used for. So, late January, we'll be able to come to this committee with more information.
Okay.
So do you
And
think
Susan,
that will
did
be when police comes for everything then? On the 17th or?
Yeah, I think police can probably come with all their requests at once.
Okay. Right.
And Susan, did you put things into the police folder in the shares drive?
Depended on what it was, but yeah, I did put some stuff in there. You're not seeing it?
I'm seeing let's see. I'm just seeing the camera quote. My favorite AYAT camera quote is the only thing I'm seeing in the police folder.
Right, okay, that's strange.
Anyway, because I'm in the annual records 26,
Yeah,
and then in the police folder, and there's only one item.
The file itself may have to be shared.
yeah, maybe I put it in my files and I need to move it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Oh, yeah, there it is, rolling stock inventory. All right, I'll move that.
okay, thank you.
All right. I don't want to do it right now because I want to take our time.
Yeah,
All
no.
right, I think we can move on in the conversation then.
So yeah, the next thing on the agenda is the layout of the warrant. Obviously, this town meeting kind of spoke to the need for organizing some of the stuff. We'd like the conversation that and the conversation we had with the schools was a misunderstanding, and we've had this problem as well in our meetings about when we have an appropriation for a project where the money's coming from. So now that we have the stabilization funds, we'd like this committee to support the idea that we should really be clear and have different buckets. If we need to do different articles or we just do the A, B, C thing, that's fine. But, you know, having all these things mixed up together is making it real hard to go back in time and figure out what happened when. And it's also messing up people's expectations about how much money there is to spend.
You have the head of the school committee saying you've got $3 million, and it's like, well, no.
No, right. Well, also, and then we can't track, you know, how much each of the stabilization funds have. It's just really hard for us to go back in time and you know, do that via the warrant organization.
And I think the other reality too, particularly with the school stabilization fund, is that for the next couple of years, the big ticket items are likely to be MASB requests, which are going to require a separate motion anyway for their purposes. So you're almost going to have to, you're almost always going to have a motion specifically for, like, when we do Osgood roofs in the spring, I guarantee you there's going to have to be a specific motion that supports that appropriation out of the school capitalization fund. And so while we have a table now that shows the source of fundings, you know, in my mind, we can structure the warrant however we want it, as far as I know. It's really a matter of convenience. Obviously, we've historically done one capital appropriation. You know, there's, in my mind, it would almost make sense to have, you know, three separate articles. One be the capital stabilization fund, one be the school stabilization fund, and the third be the roads and sidewalks. And
Right.
sort of lay it out very clearly to people. So you've got one table that you're appropriating in each of them. But that's just my logic train. I think commingling is a bad idea going forward, and however we separate it, we have to separate it.
Well, it's definitely gotten more complicated with the additional sources of funding. So maybe separating it makes sense. Or at least we can do a lot better job of how we did it in the warrant, because it was very confusing the last time around.
Yeah. Well, and part of it too was like, you know, I think it was part of the reason I asked the question back in November, which is like, how are the motions going to get written? And then we walk in and I'm reading a motion and I'm like, well, wait a second, motion A, motion B, they're talking about 1.4 million here. They're talking about another 115 there. It just, there's got to be a better way to do it. And
Well, they had one table at the top of the motion, and then they started breaking it into the sections. Maybe if the table were broken by section, you know, capital stabilization items in section, whatever.
yeah,
But it wasn't done that way. So yeah, it was hard to follow even for people who are familiar with it. So yeah, it needs a little work. And we can
Yeah.
talk about how we want to, what we want to recommend.
and it doesn't matter whether it's three separate warrant articles or it's just, you know, one warrant article with three separate motions or three, you know, separate tables, however we do it. I think what we faced this time, we're going to face again in the spring, for sure.
Yeah. Well, there's something to what you're saying in that, like, for example, roads and sidewalks would be its own article, and it's a stabilization fund. So maybe it makes sense to have the school's stabilization fund its own article.
Yeah.
And part of my thought process too was that, you know, the school stabilization fund is going to be the Goliath in general, appropriation. And now we're mixing a
correct.
$1.4 million appropriation against $17,000 for tasers. It just doesn't, or long rifles. It feels like apples and oranges. So in some ways, like, calling out the school stabilization, given it's going to, I mean, there will be cases where it's maybe an engineering appropriation that's smaller, but in general, it's going towards these large projects. It doesn't merit the same level of conversation. You're going to have a detailed conversation about 1.4 million, where we hope that if we've done our job, the police appropriation sort of sail through, because it's, you know, a bunch of 50,000 and we've done our work and, you know, we can answer the questions, but it's apples and oranges.
We saw that during special. Exactly. It's just hard for people to stand up and talk about, you know, things in the article when every person that stands up is on a completely different part of the map. So yeah, just having at least the schools can be their own thing. And then, you know, also I think it gives the town moderator a little more space to give room for conversations versus trying to get through the article.
Okay, so, in that same line of thinking, then the enterprise fund should probably be in their own article.
Yeah,
So enterprise stabilization funds and capital.
yeah.
Okay, can recommend that. All right, we'll do that. Do you guys want to look at the checklist, or do you want to discuss this any further?
I'm good.
Okay, Katie, you want to bring up your checklist that you sent out?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Are you able to
sorry
share
about
or no?
this. My
I'll-
dog.
That's
Sorry,
your dog? Okay, well, mine's
that's
about
my
to
dog.
go
I'm
off.
sorry.
No. Mine's about to bark when my husband gets home, so be prepared. I've got it here. Let me see if I can share it. Okay. I'm not sure Michelle has given me share capabilities.
I think I can share. Let me bring it
You
up.
should. Let me check it out. Hang on.
Oh, maybe, sorry. It's under the three dots, right?
In the little thing at the bottom of the screen. The up arrow. So while we're talking about this, it's really two parts to it, Katie. There's sort of the checklist part that you were focusing on, and then Ralph brought up a a document that we spent a heck of a lot of time on a few years ago in capital budget, and it was more about how do we evaluate the requests that come in. So
Yep.
did you guys take a look at that document where we tried to come up with a risk rating system? And it may not be exactly what we do, but I think some of the thought process in there does make sense. Pieces of it.
Yeah, a lot of good questions, a lot of good ways to phrase things. At least, I mean, if it gets down to the point where we have to score stuff, then we at least have a methodology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if we don't apply specifically values to it, it's just a good framework for how you want to go about looking at the submissions.
Agreed.
Yeah, I really liked, I mean, I liked what resonated with me was sort of dividing it in one of the divisions being that essential versus expansion of existing versus new. Like that's actually a really helpful thing to think about this upfront, about everything that we're seeing coming in. And then I did like that on the second one, in terms of the sort of the more detailed matrix, just thinking through mandatory, essential, cost savings, maintenance, improvement. I think that those two matrices were super helpful to me as a new member, just to sort of orient myself. How we all weight them, I think that's like a bigger conversation.
Yes, that was a harder conversation. But maybe one more category up there, and that is when we have projects that are part of a program. For example, the video monitors in the school. You know, you don't want to, if the program is, and this is something that I think was important that we asked them for at the end of when they came to us last year, is how's the program going? How's the you know, how's the reaction to the devices? Are they being well utilized? You know, et cetera, et cetera. And if the answer to all that is yes, it's being positively, you know, utilized and it's having an impact on the education of the students, then that is a program we want to continue. You know, we don't want to like cut
Sure.
that short in the middle. So maybe there's something on there, one more category, but are you sharing? Are you able to share now?
Yeah, I'm actually able to share now, sorry.
Yeah.
Took me a. Right. And so what we had talked about in November was sort of having a little bit more guidance to the departments townwide about what we're looking for, in addition to just the funding summary, so that people would show up with a more complete package. So I thought the concept was that we were going to send this out to each of the departments before we kind of had them come before us. To introduce all the liaisons if they hadn't been already, but then to sort of be very clear about what we're looking for. I think it's helpful if the departments actually have like a little summary table of like what they're requesting in terms of projects. So you could sort of get a sense of like what the total budget is coming from an individual town department, instead of just having a bunch of projects, you know, in a shares drive that you're sort of tallying up on your own. So outside of liaisons, like having, you know, each department sort of report out what their sum total of project requests are looking like. And then in terms of like what we asked for in terms of a checklist, this was more just giving some additional guidance. Some departments do this well, others need a little bit of help, but just remind them for each project that we're looking for background, whether that's, you know, photos, consulting reports on the project itself, the funding request form, and then detailed quote. I guess the question is, do we want to ask for anything else in terms of additional, just general, generic items up front, or does it then become a little bit more project specific in terms of like what we would want?
I like less, you know, I think so the feedback we've gotten already is people look at certain forms and they glaze, and so bringing in a base level that's simple to understand but a minimum to move forward, and then we can build upon that. I think your intuition is right, Katie, that we don't want to go too much more specific than here.
And I'm not wedded to any of the wording here, so if there's like, if the wording that I chose doesn't make sense to people, whatever works for the group. I also did ask that people included a 10-year capital plan. I think for some departments, that's going to be easier to do. Like police has maintained theirs, schools is sort of restarting theirs. Elder Affairs actually admitted to me that they don't have one, but they're looking to build one. I mean, they were sort of in a weird position in that they inherited a brand new building 10 years ago, so they didn't really have a capital plan. And then like flash forward to 2025, they're like, oh shoot, stuff is starting to break. I'm like, yeah, that's why capital plans are helpful, because things break after a decade. So they recognize the value and will be putting something together. But I think in general, asking each department to have their capital plan as part of their submission would be helpful, because it keeps it in the forefront of people's work product annually.
Yep, that's true. Now, I think what you're asking for is exactly what we need. The existing conditions piece is always important. When they're often like replacing something that's deteriorating or broken, we always like to see what it is we're replacing. So that's good up there. Consulting report, that's a big enough bucket. That could also be, any kind of analysis or report
Yeah.
on the project. But to Corey's point, our funding request form is kind of long, and if you really look at it, people fill out the same 2 or 3 boxes and then they skip a lot of them.
Yep. Well, and even though they do fill out, it's usually the same like sentence said different
Yeah,
ways.
right, copy
This is
paste.
this is high priority. We need this.
Mhm.
It is needed. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. I'd be willing to take a shot at simplifying that form.
I mean, I think that would be helpful, because I do think that, a lot of people look at it and they spend more time worrying about the form than providing the context, and I'd rather have it be the flip, like,
Yeah.
the form is important because it gives us sort of a standard template, but often our questions are never gonna be answered by that form. It's like emphasizing the context up front, that is where I'd rather have them focus, so that when we look at it, we sort of know what we're
Yeah.
approaching versus like having a list of questions that we're looking to get answered in that first conversation.
What do you guys think of adding these categories to the form and asking people, you know, is the project mandatory? Is it essential? Is it, you know, what do you think about that?
I don't know if we can get people to realistically reflect on their own things at this like this. I mean,
Okay.
I think that's also something that no one's gonna open a conversation with an answer of that. That's honest. I think you're not gonna get that until you've got some sort of back and forth. You're at conversation 2 or 3.
All right, I'll just go for simplifying it.
Yeah.
And I'll
do
pass
think-
around a draft.
I do well. There could be an either or. Sorry, Katie, for whether this is a replacement or I would like to know, you know, ongoing costs due to your previous appropriation, like a lease,
Yeah.
replacement of existing equipment or new equipment. Like that
Mhm.
gets us,
Yes.
and that's easy. That's factual, right? And we always ask that question somehow. It's always kind of stuck, and that's part of the thing. So I would add that.
Yeah, we always ask useful life. We always ask, you know, is it part of, like you're saying, part of a multi-year program? You know,
Grant
talk
funding.
about the cost, you know, breaking it down into, you know, are there other things built in there like training, support? For example, some of the things we've done in the past, we paid for it in the first year, and then you know, aspects of it have had to go onto their operating budget after that. So
Yeah, exactly.
so just really just the details of they don't have to get into some big, you know, paragraph discussions, because that's why they come before us, but just to put all the breadcrumbs out there that we need in order to make the decisions we need.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think once we get into cash payback and stuff like that, there's just no way that people are gonna take the time or necessarily understand what we're asking for and stuff like that.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that we can come up in a conversation.
Yeah. It's also a question that we as a committee are more likely to sort of want to tackle than the departments themselves.
Right.
You also might want to ask if this funding is to be combined with other funding. You know, as often we provide 30 and then a grant gets to 20, something like that, just to give people the opportunity to show what the full project cost is. Because that is
Right.
something that comes up before, and that's factual, not opinion.
Okay.
I guess the question is like, you know, we're obviously, we're underway here. Do we want to change out the form before we get to January? Do we want to take this on as a project for the future?
I do it rolling, Katie. I mean, just do it
Yeah.
live, right? I mean, I don't think it doesn't hurt anything, and
Yeah,
you know, right? Just throw it out there, and if we have to fix it, we fix it. No one's gonna. Yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna be mad at us for doing that like that.
No.
well, I just know the schools have already started filling out the other funding requests. I don't want them to feel like they have to go back and necessarily
we're-
fill out a new form, like it, but if you haven't started, like, start with the new one, I guess.
Yeah,
is-
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Because again, to your point, you said it earlier perfectly, which is the point of the form is to assist the conversation. It's not
Right.
supposed to be the be all and end all, right? It's
Mm.
just supposed to be an entry point. So, you know, that entry point is flexible by design.
Okay, I'll take all that into consideration and I'll try to turn it around in the next day or two to you guys and you can get back to me on with your comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
To the agenda. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Capital County Design Department. Are we, is this more, this line item, is this more for moving forward with the liaison process to get people going? Is that what this line item's for? Because I don't recall when we put it on here, what we put it on here for.
The 735.
Yeah,
That's more a question from Michelle for the money that that we've identified. What are the action steps that has to occur for us to reappropriate? We just had it. We wanted to just
Oh,
close
right.
that loop.
Yeah.
Um,
So I can answer that.
Yeah.
So, to reappropriate that money, we have to go back to town meeting and just have
Oh.
it turned back to capital.
But can we spend it at the same time meeting?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right.
Oh, great.
So I'm gonna share the other spreadsheet I did, which was, what do we have to spend? In terms of capital budget.
So that number is now 384,
412.
413.
Yeah, there we go, 413. We'll give ourselves that extra dollar.
By a keyboard.
But exactly. So we've got our starting balance, assuming we get a similar appropriation from previous cycles, plus 2.5%, which is $50,000. That's at 2.148 million. We've got our repurposed articles at 384. We've got our debt service. If we appropriate $2 million at annual town meeting upcoming, that'll leave us a balance of a little under 1.3 million. So that sort of feels right.
Yeah, we're a little oversubscribed, but with the 384 and the two, yeah, we'll be
I mean, again, this was more for discussion. I thought I personally, it's helpful for me to sort of understand, not necessarily down to the, $50,000 level, but like, $250,000 level, like what are we talking about? 1.5 million, 1 3/4, 2 million. What's our overall sort of thought process in terms of budget going in?
yeah, 2.2, 2.25 is kind of where we're going to be with the reappropriated money and the $100,000 that we got tossed. So
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
and yeah, we to your point, we need to go a little light because we went a little heavy previous years and we don't want to continue to dig that hole. So
Well, I guess that was one of my questions for the committee, which is like, what do we want the ending balance to, what has always been the goal in terms of that ending balance?
$1 million.
Oh, around 1 million, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we're at 930 last year. So yeah, we got a 70. Is that your adjustment there? Your 75 interest earned? No, that's something else. So yeah, we'll be just around $1 million with the interest payments. So
yeah. No, this is Don's roll forward. This isn't Katie Dugan. This is just Don.
okay.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to me, to sort of understand that sort of our rough budget. And this, again, this is just for, as we were talking about all the buckets, this is just the capital stabilization. We've got a separate bucket for school stabilization, which we know is going to be Osgood roof.
Yep.
Essentially, we've got a separate bucket for roads and sidewalks, and then we've got our enterprise fund. So we do have, 4 things, but this is the main one that we spend most of our time on.
Correct. Yeah, it's the one that with all the prioritization we have to fit it all in one bucket. Yeah.
Yeah. And the schools did share with us today more background on the Osgood Roof Program. I haven't had a chance to open the Google Drive yet, but when I do, I'll go through and pick out sort of the key things and put them into the OneDrive for everybody. It sounded like what they shared was, things like the SOI that they had submitted and obviously gotten approval on. So as we get more information on that roof project, we'll upload it, but they did give us some stuff.
Cool.
I guess my only other question, we had a goal the last two meetings to have minutes.
There's background there. I'll
Yeah.
fill you in offline. Yeah. We'll work on them. We may have to,
So
yeah.
you guys all saw Ellen's email then, right?
What?
You guys all saw Ellen's email from the 14th of December?
About
Yes.
the school building?
Yes.
Yeah.
The core program, yeah, I'm not surprised. That core program is one that you'd have to apply to multiple years. And we're up against buildings in Western Mass that are,
Yeah.
100 years old, and our last update was in 2000. So it's a tough bucket, but the only way you ever get anywhere is by asking annually.
Okay, you gotta keep putting it back in there.
Yeah,
Okay. All
yeah.
right. then. All right, so just closing items, just continue the liaison sessions. They're obviously very fruitful. Chris, now that you're live on the system, I can get you to come along on a few. I tried to send you some emails on the police, but you weren't on the receiving end.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm still working my way in, but I think I am in now. So
Yeah.
if you send them so I'm
Yeah,
better
we have
positioned for
a
the
couple
next.
together, so I'll get you
Okay.
back on there and we'll start lining ourselves up, and anyone else who has meetings to establish.
Yeah.
should
And
start
thanks,
getting
and
the stuff
I
taken
just
in.
wanted to say thanks to Mikel and to Michelle and Katie for their help in my getting onboarded.
Yeah. Anytime. Ralph and I are meeting with facilities, January 8th, I think. So we've got that on the books. We reached out to Brian and Carl also on the DPW front, but haven't heard back. So, I'll sort of poke them again, in hopes of having a liaison meeting there.
And I'll reach out to the harbor and library. I don't know if I had another one. I'm sorry. I missed the meeting where you made the,
We assigned you?
but yeah. I think I'm on for the harbor and library. If there's something else, let me know and I'll make sure I arrange a meeting.
Well, it's on top of our new form. Where's that
Oh, there
form?
we go. Yeah, that's right. My new form. I knew I had dug this out. Let's see. Had you on harbor.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
I had you on library.
Yep.
Yeah, those were the two.
I see the form. Yep. Thank you.
Great. All right, then. Does anyone have anything else? Like I said, I'll work on the form and circulate it in the next day or two.
Okay.
I think we're all set then.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Do I have a
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, roll call. Chris,
Chris Peich, aye.
Corey,
Corey Evans, aye.
Katie,
Katie Dugan, aye.
Francine,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Susan Franklin, I. I'm not sure if Ralph is there. Ralph? Might have lost Ralph. Okay, then.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a very merry if
Have a
we
great
don't see
night.
each other before then.
And, the next meeting.
Oh,
is
yeah.
Everybody okay with, well, the week, next week is the 23rd.
Yeah, that'd be a no.
Yeah.
Christmas, so is the 30th open for people, or Michelle's shaking her head, we're not gonna get anybody, so are we into January then, January 6th?
Yeah.
Okay, January 6th it is.
Yeah,
Right.
that works for me.
All right,
Okay,
sounds good. Michelle will work on who might be able to come before us on the 6th.
Sure. Yep.
All right,
I'll send out those feelers now. I'll also socialize the form once you add your details to it.
all right, great then. All right, everybody.
All right. Well,
Bye.
have a merry,
Good
happy
night.
holidays.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Merry
Right.
Christmas.
Okay.
Everyone,
Right.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.